In the hushed early morning hours of the 24th of October in 1963, a tranquil village nestled on the Caribbean island of Haiti found itself frantically awakened from its slumber. The inhabitants of the village erupted into a panic as they were forced to bear witness to something that shouldn't be real, something that should only live in the darkest corners of the scariest stories passed down from generation to generation. On the fringes of the village of Ennery appeared a woman. Emerging from the shadows of the early morning mist, she staggered and stumbled her way slowly to the village center. An elderly woman. Her stature barely surpassed 5 feet. Her frame was marked by a malnourishment that seemed almost inconceivable. But it was her skin that sent shivers down spines. An ashen pallor like ancient parchment that was barely clinging to her bones. She had sunken eyes that no longer bore lashes, as if they had surrendered to the darkness within her. But it wasn't her physical condition alone that stirred the villagers' trepidation. It was also the undeniable pain that radiated from her eyes when they met the sunlight. The villagers were terrified. Yet their terror was not prompted by the sight and appearance of the stranger. Instead, it was the realization that this fragile figure, this woman, was no stranger to the village. In fact, they knew her quite well. And many of them had attended her funeral some 29 years earlier. You see, the woman, Felicia Felix Mentor, had come back from the dead. Welcome, dear souls, to the Haunted Grove podcast, where we talk about anything and everything spooky and paranormal. And each week we are digging up the stories that have haunted the human imagination for centuries. I am Magan, your host, and if you like listening to a spooky nerd talk about spooky things, well, then you're in the right place, because I am that spooky nerd, and tonight we are starting the spooky season off right by talking about a monster that has been slowly shuffling its decaying feet through our delicious brains and right to our hearts for centuries. That's right, we are talking about zombies. In this Undead episode, we are going on a journey through time and across cultures, and really peeling back the rotting layers of mystery that shroud these reanimated beings. From age-old tales whispered around ancient campfires to the flickering screens of modern cinema, the undead have clawed their way through time and culture, leaving a lingering tinge of terror on our collective psyche. So be prepared as we traverse the murky origins of zombie folklore. We'll then step into the absolutely fascinating world of Haitian voodoo, where the legacy of zombies intertwines with spiritual practices and societal dynamics. But we don't stop there. Oh no, like a kindergartner's trick-or-treat bag, this episode is jam-packed with goodies. We'll stagger our way through the realm of Hollywood and examine how zombies have evolved and carved their forever home into our collective nightmares. So let's begin, shall we? From the eerie shuffling of decaying footsteps to the insatiable hunger for human flesh, the fear of the undead has haunted our imaginations for centuries. Long before Hollywood's rendition of the undead, cultures from around the world whispered tales of these horrifying creatures straddling the realm between life and death. These eerie stories can be found in myths that span continents, offering a really haunting glimpse into humanity's fascination with the unknown throughout history. Here's the deal. Humans have been scared of the dead coming back to life for a long time. You can go all the way back to ancient Greece to find evidence of civilizations wanting their dead loved ones to stay dead. Archaeologists have excavated many gravesites containing skeletons with heavy objects like boulders placed on top of them. Now, we obviously don't know exactly why they did this, but it sure looks like they were trying to make sure that that dead body stayed right there. This fear of the undead is not tied to any specific culture or location, like the gashadokoro from Japanese folklore. It's over 10 meters tall and made up of the skulls of people who died during times of famine and war. And this monstrous skeletal nightmare is said to roam the streets at 2 a.m., searching for its next victim to attack and devour. And despite its massive size, it's said to be stealthy and possibly possess the powers of invisibility, making it impossible to see coming. And if you're out by yourself late at night and you hear the sound of chattering teeth, well then, it is too late because the gashadokoro has already found you. And if we look at European undead folklore, then we're met with the revenant. These entities were thought to be souls that had returned from the grave, often with unfinished business or unresolved grievances. Revenants were often depicted as reanimated corpses, and in medieval Europe, the tumultuous backdrop of plague, war, and social upheaval really breathed life into the belief of the revenant. Because like most things, if it's horrible, terrible, mysterious, or just unknown, it's human nature to blame it on something equally horrible, terrible, mysterious, and unknown, like monsters and spirits. Stories from various European countries spoke of these undead beings wandering villages, lurking in graveyards, and terrorizing the living. Some were said to be vengeful knights seeking justice, and others were just deceased loved ones returning to bid farewell. Revenants took on a multitude of forms, reflecting the diverse fears and hopes of the communities that gave birth to these stories. And even though zombie-like creatures and entities have plagued all of these cultures for centuries, the zombie that we think of today, the one that most of us envision when you close your eyes and think of the word zombie, that is the zombie from Haitian folklore. And that zombie has a very disturbing backstory. In the 17th century, when West African slaves were brought to the Caribbean island of Haiti to work in the sugarcane plantations, they couldn't bring much with them, if anything. They had everything taken away from them, stripped of all of their possessions and freedoms. And the one thing that they could manage to smuggle on board that no one could take away from them was they brought zombies. Well, more accurately, they brought the stories of zombies, the tales of the undead passed down through generations. There are some accounts that the zombie we most commonly think of, that reanimated undead body, was introduced as a way for the slaves to represent the pain and horrors that they endured being forced to work on those sugarcane plantations. Which would make sense that these totally horrific situations that slaves were forced into could only be represented by something as equally terrifying and uncontrollable. In addition to their cultural beliefs and lore, they also brought with them their religion, voodoo. And to be clear, there are a lot of untrue and really ridiculous stereotypes surrounding voodoo, and a majority of the people who practice voodoo do not believe in zombies. And for them, the zombie is just that. It's a myth, and it gets told from generation to generation. If you're interested in learning more about voodoo, I highly suggest that you do some research and not believe all the stuff you see in the movies, because it's not always true. But that being said, there are some that do believe zombies are real. And not only are they real, but they are created. They're created by the hands of a voodoo practitioner known as a bokor. The stories say that by using different combinations of herbs, bones, animal parts, and a toxin found in pufferfish, a bokor can create zombie powders. The powder would then be given to the victim without them knowing. And there's a variety of different ways that this could happen. Like ingestion, the victim could inhale it somehow, or even through an injection from like a needle or a blow dart. The key ingredient to the zombie powder, the part that actually makes it make a zombie, is the pufferfish toxin called tetrodotoxin. It's a neurotoxin that in small doses can cause symptoms like stumbling around, appearing dazed and confused, as well as respiratory or breathing problems, which sounds pretty zombie-like to me. In high doses, however, the toxin is fatal. But if you were a master of the technique and you could get the dose just right, it would cause the person to become paralyzed and fall into a coma. And that person would appear dead to everyone around them, and the results would end up in the victim being buried alive. So why would somebody do this? Why would a bokor put someone into a coma to then ultimately be buried alive and eventually die of asphyxiation? But death was not the true intention of the bokor. See, the mixing, the creation of the powder, administering it to the victim, the coma, the burial, that's all just part of the zombification process. And really, it's part one of the zombification process. After the burial, like very shortly after the burial, the person didn't actually die. So the bokor would slip back into the cemetery and dig up the victim. And then after filling back in the hole as to not arouse any suspicion, will then take the victim to a location only known to the bokor, where they would proceed to the second part of the zombification process, which is separating the soul from the physical body. The bokor would perform a voodoo ritual that would separate the soul into two parts. The first part controls the body, and the bokor keeps that part. The second part stays with the physical body, essentially reanimating it. But now the body is under the control of the bokor. So the bokor holds on to the control spirit and can have their very own slave to do whatever the bokor wants, like work in a plantation, do construction, or even just do odd jobs around the house. But you get the idea. The bokor is in control, and the victim is powerless to stop him. And the family is none the wiser because they are sure their loved one is dead and buried. Sounds pretty creepy, right? I can totally see people telling and retelling these myths to their friends and families to give them a good scare, or even mothers telling their kids to behave or the bokor will get you, right? To make sure that the kids listen. But unlike their younger modern pop culture siblings, Haitian zombies may actually be rooted in fact, and not just stories made up to scare you. There are several verified cases of real zombies reported in Haiti. Now, you heard about Felicia Felix Mentor at the very beginning of this episode. It was her family that recognized her right away, as the woman looked like Felicia and had the same limp that Felicia had due to an old injury to her leg. And there are people on both sides of the fence about Felicia's story. Some truly believe that she came back from the dead as a zombie, while others believe that she just went insane. And although that doesn't really explain her family attending her funeral and then her just showing up one day, or could it? Because this is not the only story of a real person coming back from the dead in Haiti. The story of Clairvius Narcisse is a wild ride. He was a Haitian man who claimed to have been abducted by a bokor, turned into a zombie, and then forced to work as a slave. In the spring of 1962, Clairvius was not feeling well at all. He was so bad off, in fact, that he checked himself into a local hospital where he quickly developed a fever, fatigue, and began coughing up blood. The doctors had no idea what was going on with him, so ultimately they didn't know how to help him. Everything they tried didn't have any effect, and eventually he passed away a few days after he was admitted. He was pronounced dead, and his body was taken down to the morgue where it was put in cold storage. And shortly after that, there was a funeral, where his family said their last goodbyes and his body was buried. But that's not the end of the story. 18 years later, in 1980, a woman named Angelina was approached by a man claiming to be her dead brother Clairvius. Naturally, Angelina had some questions. So through a series of questions and events, Clairvius had managed to prove not only to Angelina, but to another family member that he was indeed her brother Clairvius, who had not died but was buried 18 years earlier. Clairvius even pointed to a scar on his face and said that it was from one of the nails that had been used to hammer the lid of his casket shut. Clairvius claims that he was awake and conscious for the whole thing, them pronouncing him dead, being stored in the morgue, and ultimately listening to his funeral and burial. Shortly after the funeral had ended, he claims that someone came and dug up his body, revived him, and then started feeding him this weird paste on a regular basis that kept Clairvius in this zombie-like state, where he and many others were forced to work on a sugarcane plantation for the next 16 years. At some point around year 16, the Bokor had died, so now Clairvius was no longer receiving this paste and slowly started to come out of his zombie-like trance and regain his memory, thus allowing him to escape back to his family. I don't know, what do you guys think? It really sounds like a zombie story to me, and also I did read that everybody knew him. They recognized him after he came back, so there wasn't some random person claiming to be Clairvius. His family knew him. So it's a pretty crazy story, but it is a true story. But those early beliefs had laid the groundwork for zombie narratives and stories like this that would emerge in later centuries. They demonstrated humanity's early fascination with the unknown, the boundaries of existence, and the desire to unravel the mysterious beyond. As the winds of time carried these tales across cultures, they gathered new layers of meaning and fear, culminating in the modern concept of a zombie, an entity that continues to both haunt and captivate our collective psyche. The hallowed halls of Hollywood have proven to be fertile ground for the transformation of zombies. From obscure folklore to iconic symbols of horror and societal reflection, the evolution of the zombie within Western pop culture can be traced along the sinuous path of horror movies, a journey that has reshaped and redefined these creatures, giving them a lasting place in nightmares of audiences worldwide. At the heart of this zombie transformation stands a towering figure in the genre, George A. Romero, whose 1968 film, Night of the Living Dead, cast an indelible shadow over the world of horror cinema. This landmark film introduced the modern zombie archetype, an insatiable, decaying creature driven by an unrelenting hunger for human flesh. Romero's vision resonated deeply with audiences, giving birth to an entire subgenre of zombie apocalypse films that captivated generations. Sequels like Dawn of the Dead in 1978 and Day of the Dead in 1985 further emphasize these metaphors. Dawn of the Dead took place in a shopping mall, critiquing consumerism's numbing effect on society, while Day of the Dead delved into the dehumanizing of scientific experimentation. The undead in these films were not just monsters to be feared, but mirrors reflecting the darkness and discord lurking within human nature. As the years marched on, the zombie genre evolved, influenced by shifts in culture and technology. The fast-paced frenetic zombies of the 21st century, exemplified in films like 28 Days Later in 2002, spoke to the modern world's anxieties of viral outbreaks and societal breakdowns. The zombie apocalypse narrative grew as a cautionary tale, warning of the fragility of societal threads and the potential consequences of unchecked human actions. In the age of digital storytelling, the zombie genre has evolved into a sprawling landscape, expanding its horizons far beyond the confines of traditional film. Modern media, including TV shows, video games, and literature, have contributed to the genre's transformation, infusing it with new layers of depth, intensity, and complexity. Television shows like The Walking Dead brought zombies into our living rooms, allowing for character-driven narratives that delve into the psychological toll of a post-apocalyptic world. These stories explore themes of survival, trust, and morality, painting the undead as catalysts for examining the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. Video games have even thrust players directly into the heart of zombie-infested environments, allowing for immersive experiences that blur the lines between observer and participant. Games like Resident Evil, The Last of Us, and State of Decay provide players with the agency to navigate apocalyptic landscapes, make life or death decisions, and forge emotional connections with virtual characters. These interactive mediums magnify the genre's capacity to explore the fragility of human bonds and the complexity of moral dilemmas. I think that one of the most striking shifts in the modern zombie landscape has been the transformation from a lumbering, slow-moving figure to that relentless, terrifying predator. What this has really done has infused a new urgency into the storytelling, as characters grapple with foes that are not only numerous, but they're terrifyingly swift as well. This shift has really allowed for more exploration of tension and action, and just turning the mere presence of zombies into heart-pounding sequences that challenge the protagonist both physically and emotionally. As we draw the curtains on this chilling exploration of the history and folklore of zombies, we find ourselves immersed in a tapestry of myths, science, and cultural resonance. From the mysterious origins of zombie folklore that stretched across continents, to the legend of Haitian voodoo's intricate spiritual practices, and from the flickering shadows of Hollywood's silver screen to the intimate landscapes of our modern lives, these undead have woven their way into our collective conscious in a myriad of ways. Why then do zombies continue to haunt our imagination and persist in global culture? Perhaps it's their dual nature, their simultaneous embodiment of decay and persistence, life and death, and it mirrors our own internal struggles and complexities of the human experience. Through zombies, we confront questions of morality, survival, and the thin veil that separates order from chaos. Thank you so much for joining me. This episode was written and produced by me, Magan. If you enjoyed what you heard, I would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to just leave a rating and review if you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, or haunt that like button if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. Don't forget to mention it with anyone who shares our love for the strange and unusual. Join our community over on Facebook or Instagram where you can connect with other haunted souls. And for more information about the podcast, visit the website at thehauntedgrovepod.com. Join me next week for more monsters, mysteries, and the unexplained as we celebrate spooky season and the countdown to Halloween. And remember to stay curious, stay open-minded, and stay tuned to see what shows up in the Haunted Grove next week.